All right. First off, I want to thank everyone for joining us. This is a public workshop focused on shoreline strategies. This is part of our Town of Corte Madera Climate Adaptation Plan. We are in the draft phase, and we're trying to work with everyone in the community to refine that document to get it, for a potential adoption by our council. We've received a ton of great feedback, and we've already seen some comments that we think will influence as we move the document forward. We do see some areas for revision, and we, want to also hear more today and really, really work with everyone to try to get the document to a place where we're all happy and supportive of what it means and what it does moving forward. I did want to turn it over to our town manager just to speak a little bit about that and kind of where we are in the process. We'll also have myself and others in the CAP team speak to that to kind of orient everyone where we are in the process as it speaks to various, so to speak, projects. And but we'll do a quick introductions. I'm RJ Suko, Director of Public Works, Town of Corte Madera. Sasha, if you can go next.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining. My name is Sasha Peterson. I'm the Director of Adaptation International and a project partner.
Jeremy.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Lowe. I'm a senior scientist at the San Francisco S Institute.
Ellen.
Ellen Plain, environmental analyst at the San Francisco Estuary Institute.
Adam.
Hi, Adam Wolf, planning and building director with the Town of Corte Madera.
And I will pass it over to Todd Cusimano, our town manager.
Hi, I'm Todd Cusimano, your town manager. And Rebecca, can you bring the mayor over as a panelist? Thank you. Mayor Beckman, do you want to start?
Sure thing. I don't have much to say. I just wanted to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank my colleagues on the town council. I want to thank our staff and our scientific consultants for all the great work that they've done. And of course, above all else, I want to thank the members of the public who have been really instrumental in helping shape this plan, not only here today, but also over the last 18 months. So we really appreciate everybody's involvement and participation. The feedback is really helpful for us, and it helps us make sure that we're dialing in a solution that works best for our community. The only other thing I wanted to say is to just refocus us on the fact that climate change remains the one and only existential threat to Corte Madera. So I personally see this effort, this climate adaptation planning effort, as the single most important thing that I will have done in my time on the Corte Madera Town Council. I think this is huge. What we're doing right now is laying out the blueprint for how do we protect Corte Madera from flooding and wildfire on the 50 to 100 year time frame. Big picture, what we're trying to do ultimately is buy ourselves enough time, protect Corte Madera as humanity sort of gets our act together, is able to get a grip on climate change and hopefully stop or reverse sea level rise. That's exactly why we're undertaking this process today, is to protect and preserve our homes and the families that inhabit them here in Corte Madera. So I just want to thank again all the staff for this incredible work going forward, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of this workshop today.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And to the community at large, I mean, this is an opportunity for us to engage you, and we're all citizens in our own community, and unfortunately, we probably only get involved at times of, in situations where it's high energy, it's a high impact to us personally, and we sometimes don't always have the most positive engagement. And a lot of times, positive things within a city or town don't ever happen because the government is reluctant to really do what they should be doing, and that's what I want to speak to right now. Because I'm proud of it. When I was hired as your town manager 4 years ago, and at the council's direction, I worked for the town council, they gave me a set of priorities, and it's what brought me here. I've served this community for over 25 years, and it was to develop a plan to protect the house, to protect the town of Corte Madera, not just in this conversation right now, but in every aspect, to be transparent, to bring process, to bring the discussion to every resident in our community on all the things that impact us today and in the future, but ultimately not, and we'll talk about this is called the Climate Adaptation Plan. It's on the title. It's not a plan. And it's something that I still challenge staff with and everyone on this call. It's to set a menu of options, right? Today and over the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Everything we do, we want to have a plan so we don't get into the situation where it's an A and B discussion. You have two options. You only have one option. We want to have a variety of options. This is highly sensitive, as we've seen from the comments from neighbors. And so I think it's always important for everyone to know the intent. Why are we doing this? And the mayor said it so eloquently, much more succinctly than me, but I really want to emphasize that we are here to develop a plan. How do we pay our unfunded liabilities? How do we make us fiscally solvent today and over the next 50 years? How do we handle our infrastructure? All those things. And so we want to have a set of priorities and ideas and a big picture plan. As it relates to this, I just want you to know, we heard you. This is an 18-month process. We're going into, I think, month 19. Well, now we have the engagement and we want to engage you. We want to have a discussion. We think we have, as RJ said, we have some opportunities to really make this a better document. And that's what we're trying to do. When you think about, you know, a lot has been discussed on climate change, but I also want to point out, and you will hear it from some of the callers today, you know, when you look at our current situation, two things jump out at me as your town manager. The first is half of our community is in the fire zone. And so what can we do to mitigate those risks? The other part is sea level rise, but also settlement. We've had this specific neighborhood, the Mariner Cove neighborhood, and in some areas, I believe has settled almost up to 5 feet since the inception of the development of this residential unit. So it's just not about sea level rise or climate change. It's also about settlement. It's also about earthquake safety and liquefaction and how our specific neighborhood, Mariner Cove, is impacted. This is one of the reasons why we started this process and started talking to council 4 years ago about we need to have a set of options. We need to bring in the experts, the scientists, follow the facts and the evidence of what can we do to protect us. And is there even an option available to us short-term, long-term to protect the Mariner Cove neighborhood? And so that's what you're going to hear tonight. And I also want to challenge everyone to think about this. What are the options to buy us as much time as possible over the next 100 years to save the Mariner Cove neighborhood? And there's still more studies. This process is so extensive. And I think, you know, the greatest gift, RJ and the team, that we can give our neighbors, our residents, as you always educate me, because it's still complicated in my little brain. I can't imagine how some of our neighbors are spinning that are trying to catch up right now. It's to understand kind of the matrix of our decision making, right? What are we trying to do? But also, as we move forward, when are those decisions evaluated and actually made? Like, how do we make those? So I think that's going to be really huge for our residents tonight. And at the end of the day, you need to know what we're trying to do. We're trying to save our community. But words and actions matter, as some of you have said in your emails. We've read them all. And so that's what we're here. We're here to roll up our sleeves and do the work and protect our community, as the mayor said. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the team, and I really look forward to engaging you all today.
Thank you, Todd. So I'll take it from here, and I'll be passing to our consultant team shortly. So just want to let everyone know we are going to spend the majority of today answering questions and clarifying anything that is in the document. We are going to lead with a short presentation just so we all have you know, some level of information to go off of. But just kind of echoing the sentiment by the mayor and our town manager, you know, our intention as project team, as staff, is really to be proactive. That's always been our goal. You know, how can we serve our community? How can we safeguard our community? And given the subject matter, it's difficult. We're discussing, you know, challenging conditions with the threat of sea level rise. So trying to find that sweet spot between being proactive, educating the public, but also not overly concerning and alerting people. And it's complicated. I tried to come up with an analogy, and it's the best one I could find is it's like a doctor going to a patient and saying, you know, hey, there's a medical condition, but the good thing is there's treatment options. Let's discuss those. It's not a comfortable discussion on either end, but it's important to have that discussion. So with that, I'm going to give it to Sasha with our Adaptation International team to discuss a little bit about where we've been, the process, and then I'll do a more detailed look at some of the shoreline strategies and possible options. And then again, we'll open it up for discussion and really dig into anything you want. Thank you.
Great, thank you, RJ. I'll just do a quick introduction as we are getting into this so that everybody's familiar with your screen. You've probably done 1,000 Zoom meetings over the last year, so it's probably easy. But just as a reminder for your engagement today, there are two really great ways to participate. So one is you can see down here at the bottom, there's the raise the hand option. So after this introductory presentation that RJ's going to give, then we'll have a discussion period. You can raise your hand, get in the queue, and have a chance to speak some of your questions, comments, concerns, ideas. There's also right next to that is a little Q&A button, so question and answers. That's sort of like the chat feature, and if you want to test it out now, you could type in the street that you live on, and that will go into the question and answers. There's some cool features with this version of Zoom's webinar in that you can, if someone puts in a comment a question that you like, there's a little thumbs up, so you can upvote different things if you agree with them instead of retyping them. You can also comment on other people's comments and say like, yes, that's a great idea, or that's also my concern. So we'll be able to use that throughout the presentation and also throughout the discussion, because with more than 100 people on the line, we want to make sure everyone's voices are heard and ideas are considered, but it's going to be tricky to get everybody to have the opportunity to speak. And then when you are called upon later during the discussion, after you raise your hand, we'll unmute you, and you could have to unmute your side, and then you'll be able to say your comment or suggestion or idea. Just to reinforce that agenda, quick welcome, we're wrapping up, a little overview, and then the bulk of the time will be spent on discussion together over these important topics. So RJ is going to talk a little bit more about this specifically, but the adaptation plan development process has, as Todd said, been happening over the last 2 years with a compilation of, working with the community and a technical working group to identify some key goals for the planning process and really to develop the roadmap, as Todd mentioned, the suite of options, some initial feasibility assessment of what options are available, what are the library of choices that the town and the community can work together to continue in the future. So this plan is not a commitment to one or more of these particular ideas, but it's putting those ideas out, filtering them, doing some initial feasibility assessments, and maybe creating a small list of things that should be considered further. So to get us all on the same page, the vision of this planning process is to build one town, one region, resilient together. There are 4 key goals, and the first one's already been touched on, and it's to protect the health, safety, and well-being of all the town's residents, visitors, and workers by being proactive and focusing on preparedness and prevention. We also want to look at incorporating resilience and equity into the town's plans, policies, and projects moving forward, increasing the community dialogue around these important issues and the urgency, as the mayor said, to prepare for climate change, and bringing the community and neighboring communities and the region together, because these are regional issues in many cases and can't necessarily be solved by the town alone. So with that, RJ, I'll let you jump into some of the, the magnitude of the challenge that is being faced.
Yeah, thank you. So before I show some maps, climate adaptation plans, sea level rise, vulnerability assessments, those are pretty common within the last 5 to 10 years. And so, sometimes it's off-putting to see a map in a neighborhood that, you live in, but you got to start somewhere if you want to come up with a plan to problem solve, some of these issues. So, if we can move to the next slide, please. So example, here's mapping from Santa Cruz. They've done a similar assessment. Next slide, please. Here's one from Alameda. Next slide, please. San Francisco. And also in 2000, next slide, please. 2017, Marin County did the Bay Wave, which actually looked at, countywide vulnerabilities to sea level rise. So, and that's available online for those that want to read up on some of the other parts within the county. So just talking, about sea level rise in general, we did have to lean on scientific models and projections. This is a graph that you'll find in the draft climate adaptation plan. The blue line here shows kind of the higher, more conservative threshold of what, is probable in certain scenarios. And then the orange line is kind of the lower end of what could happen with respect to sea level rise. In addition, there is a 3.5 foot sea level rise guidance from the Ocean Protection Council. And that's a goal that, the state has issued that local agencies and the state government should try to plan for 2050. So, there's multiple sets here and they're all, we can all talk about what numbers should be used or what shouldn't be used, but they're all saying that sea level rise is coming and we need to all take it seriously and plan ahead. Next slide. So here's a photo showing several homes during a 7.4 king tide back in 2015. So as you can see, many of these backyards are fully filled and you can see where it's starting to enter the roadway. So that's, king tides are annually occurring, several times a year in the 7+ range. And with sea level rise, obviously that would increase with storms and potential for other events such as, wave run up, those increase as well. Next slide, please. So talking about the climate adaptation plan and where we stand in kind of an overall project delivery standpoint. So this, 1 through 3 really represents the cap. And we've had several workshops and some of you may have attended, some didn't have the opportunity, but we're here now, which is great. We're trying to define goals, assess vulnerabilities, look at strategies, brainstorm. I mean, really the cap, up until now has really been a big brainstorming session that also then takes those ideas and, takes scientific and engineering analysis and tries to kind of fact find them. So we're here in phase 3 of the cap, but this really is early in the process. I mean, we're kind of just at the very, very beginning. And if you go to next slide, please. There's a whole another set of steps along the way before, projects could be implemented. And it really depends on the project. It could be something could be a goal to implement a new policy and maybe there's less steps, whereas something could be a huge multi-million-dollar project and there's a dozen steps. So just keep that in mind. Some of that depends, but really in all scenarios, there's constant community feedback. We're analyzing options. We're doing additional studies. There's going to be environmental compliance for a lot of these, infrastructures or all the infrastructure projects, permitting. There's a funding element, and then there's the actual work that goes into it. And for a large scale project, $1 million+ dollars, that's just getting to construction is anywhere from 2 to 8 or 10 years. So, just keep that in mind as we go along. But just echoing something that's been said before, any of these projects in the cap are just ideas that at a certain time down the road, we can develop those further and really start this kind of phase 4 process. It doesn't mean that we're going to be, breaking ground on anything on the shoreline front tomorrow. We're far ways out. Next slide, please. So here's that example of kind of your more simple process. So streamlining permit process and modifying building requirements to allow for additional height when elevating buildings above flood zones. So, you know, the cap occurred, that was a brainstorm idea. We can always do nothing, or we can move that forward. And so with community engagement, you know, we can identify the opportunities for enhancement, authorize funds, and then implement that program policies and monitor and evaluate. You know, that would be a simple process that would come out of the climate adaptation plan should we want to pursue something like that. Next slide, please. So this is kind of the more complex one. You know, if we're talking about, you know, how do we safeguard and our Mariner Cove and Marina Village community? You know, we've heard it through our process thus far. Many people, I'm not saying all people, many people think that we should, you know, provide some sort of flood barrier. Okay, well, we did some initial feasibility analysis, and you can see the, you know, the adaptation plan over here, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to look at really open the discussion and have, you know, way more alternatives. You know, we might be talking about, you know, different types of barriers, different heights, different alignments, and that would all occur for, you know, 2 to 3 more years if we, you know, decided we want to move that forward right now. There'd be a multi-year alternatives analysis process, many public workshops, healthy dialogue. You know, we want to partner with the community. We're trying to, again, be proactive, build something if the community desires us to build something to safeguard them. That's, you know, we're not, you know, we're not here to, you know, shove something down someone's throat that they don't want. We want to build something that, you know, protects the community. So that's an effort. That's a possibility that we could move forward. I view that as probably a $500,000 to $800,000 effort. And if you're a dollars person, like I'm sure some of you are on the on this workshop, you know, the dollars can kind of speak to how much level and effort and scope go into certain things. Well, the cap as a whole to date that we spent for the last 2 years was about $400,000. So the next stage just for a flood barrier is probably $500,000 to $800,000 specific to that one, you know, project if we were to analyze it. And that means, so, you know, 2 to 3 times, you know, 2 to 5 times more engineering that's occurred today, more environmental analysis that's occurred today, way more public outreach that's occurred today. So again, we're just very early. You know, we've just kind of moved from brainstorming and feasibility and just light feasibility into, well, let's move this forward. And so that might be one thing that one of the next steps, and we'd love to hear from the community whether that's a step we should take and invest in that process. But that is, you know, likely the next step if we want to pursue some sort of barrier for Marina Village, Mariner Cove. From there, we would then move into a more formal environmental compliance. And again, at any point in time, we could say, you know what, we want to go back to nothing. We're not happy with the options, and we're happy with the status quo. Then we would go to environmental permitting. We would work through any right-of-way challenges, and then likely 8 to 10 years down the road, we might start construction. So again, also think, you know, as sea level rise occurs, like we got to make these decisions now to be able to have them in place a decade from now. It's going to take that long. Next slide, please. And with that, so we're going to open it up for comment. We have an exercise really just to try to get as many comments as we can. Do we have a sense of how many people would like to provide comment? If you could raise your hand, that'll give us a sense of how much time we should allow. You know, the goal here is to do multiple rounds of this and give people potentially, you know, multiple times to provide comments or ask for clarifications. But we do want everyone to have at least one opportunity to speak, if not several.
As we're waiting for people to put their hands up, can I just ask a question of you? You know, on the process you just walked us through on the alternatives kind of analysis, is that like the opportunity then for us to discuss how high would a barrier be? How far out can we go with the barrier? Where that gives us then that analysis and options then really to have a factual conversation with both the town and our community of, can we get to yes? Like, what does yes look like for us? Or
yeah, absolutely. It's really the work to date in some ways was to justify the expenditure of possibly spending $500,000, $800,000 on this more robust process. And that is really the arena where we kind of start new and we really look at everything. So what are the goals? You know, let's look at all sorts of options, all sorts of heights. That's going to go hand in hand with, there's potential grant funds out there. And you know, whether it be restoration funds, whether it be FEMA funds, and some of those are going to depend on what level of protection you're providing. So they might give us more funds if it's a longer protection period. Those are things that we need to analyze, and it's going to be iterative. It's going to take that 2 to 3 years to really go through it. Okay, I think again, we're gonna the intent here is to do multiple rounds. So let's do 2 minutes on the first round, and again, we're happy to stay through the whole time and answer as many questions. And we think based on this, people should have more than one bite at the apple. So if Sasha, do you want to take over and kind of compile comments, and then we can organize how to respond?
Yeah, absolutely. Rebecca's going to help with, you know, picking people and unmuting them who have raised your hand. So if you do want to speak in this round, raise your hand and it sort of queues you up so that you can have time to speak. Again, you can use the question and answer box to type in additional comments if you don't want to speak verbally, or to, you know, highlight or augment comments that are already in there. We'll do our best to capture those comments as you're speaking and kind of group them. So we'll probably take maybe like 15 minutes now to get a first round of comments in, 15 or 20 minutes, and then see, you know, what are the common themes, and then we can come back and talk about those themes together. So let's do that, you know, and Rebecca, if you can help us.
And I think it's also helpful, you know, if people don't mind, you know, maybe say your street or your name and your street. It just helps us kind of put context with the comment or the question. Thank you.
Okay. The first attendee with the raised hand is Dr. Roger Sullivan. Oh, I just lost my, there we go. Mr. Sullivan, you can unmute yourself.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to discuss the probabilities of sea level rise that the CAP is based on. I was attending the last public meeting on January the 20th, where the mayor was copping a lot of criticism about certain aspects of the plan. And his response to the criticisms was that if we do nothing, in 50 years, we'll be underwater. Yeah, which is pretty compelling and worrying. So really the key question is then, what sort of sea level rise is the plan based on? And on page 68 of the CAP, it states that the retreat and the levy plans are to prepare the community for potentially more than 6 feet of sea level rise by 2100. And it cites, ponder that for a moment, 6 feet of sea level rise, yeah? It states the State of California Sea Level Rise Guidance 2018, which I have in front of me. So what does the California guidance actually say for 2100? It says that the most likely range, this is from the state of California, their statement, the most likely range is the 66% probability of sea level rise. It gives 2 ranges, one of high emissions, that is if we do nothing in the next 80 years, or low emissions, which of course is lower. So if I just stick to the high emissions, their projection is a range of between 1.6 feet and 3.4 feet of sea level rise. Yeah, and I invite everyone to download that file. It's available on the internet. The State of California Sea Level Rise Guidance 2018. So I'd also like to point out that there are other entities in San Francisco that are taking steps to mitigate sea level rise. One of them is the infrastructure plan for the SFO airport. And if you look on their website, they state that they are going for the 66 likely range probability recommended by the state of California. So that leaves me thinking, where does 6 feet come from?
That was time.
Yeah. Appreciate your comment. Thank you.
Oh, could I just
Yeah, I captured that.
Quick wrap up, and then again, we're going to try to do multiple rounds. So, but we just want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak.
That was 2 minutes.
Okay, the next comment is from Roy Wolford. Roy, I can unmute you.
Good afternoon. I want to thank Todd for mentioning Mariner Cove. I live in Seawolf Passage at Mariner Cove for over 45 years. I have that sinking feeling. And indeed, the reason we're flooding here in Mariner Cove isn't due to sea level rise, that is the volume of water adding to the oceans, it's settlement. Had we not had settlement here, none of the houses, or very few of the houses, would be in the flood zone. If you look at the FEMA flood map, take a look at the southeastern corner of Mariner Cove, it is not in the flood zone. That's because it's either on bedrock or close to bedrock, very little bay mud. Okay, farther out by the waters, it's 120 feet. But what I want to ask is, my concern is on the cap. I think it's a major failing of not having historical and current information related to the climate and weather. So we're talking about tides and water level. We're talking about CO2. We're talking about rainfall, temperature, settlement, all those, and elevation, very important. Take an elevation of land. I did a presentation to the town council last night where I showed that the earth is very dynamic. In some parts of the world, the water level, sea level is rising, and other parts it's dropping. So it's not all one piece. It's not all water level rising all the time. And also, it's very confusing. I had a conversation with him the other day, and he was good enough to share with me the map he showed with the charts, and rising. One graph was as high as 6.9. But when I look at the chart, and I was listening to Dr. Sullivan, I see if I'm looking at the Climate Action Plan, page 6, table 2, the actually in low emissions, 66% probability sea level rise is 1 foot to 2.4 by 2021. If we take a look at the satellite readings from NOAA and NASA, they're showing that the sea level rise on average globally, not locally, globally is 3.3 millimeters per year. Now, I'm also concerned about—
Roy, that was time. RJ, Sasha, there's a public comment that says it would be more helpful to be able to see the timer on the screen, but we can't show the timer if the screen is being shared. So I don't know how you feel about
Arlene?
in the screen in order to see the timer.
Arlene, do you have your hand up?
Okay, the next comment on the list is from Cheryl Longinati. Oh, where did she go? Cheryl, if you still wish to talk, raise your hand back up. The next comment on the list is from Arlene Wolford. Arlene? Arlene, are you able to unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question as to who are the members that are on the whole community on this plan that are from Corte Madera, that are from the community that would add input and be able to give some insight as to what is really going on around here. Is there a place where we can find them?
Their email and phone numbers.
You know, I'd like to find, is there a site on the site that has email and phone numbers or something so that we can communicate with somebody? Also, okay.
I'll do that.
All right. Roy will have some other questions. And I saw something when I was reading in the documents and stuff, it said that they needed to get it approved by the 28th, and they're hoping that we ask for an extension. Is this the same thing that we're talking about? And why would we have to approve something, get something approved before it was done with the community input? That's all.
Okay, thank you.
Rebecca, to the point about like the timer, maybe I can capture the comment and then, you know, as it gets close to the end, I could turn off that screen and then the speakers could see the clock like for the last 30 seconds or something like that. I just want to be able to reflect back comments and make sure that we're capturing them appropriately.
Okay. The next attendee with the raised hand is Mark Bello. Mr. Bello, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, yes, thank you. Just a couple general comments, and I appreciate the town coming together and spending the time on this important issue. I just want to make, I also want to comment to our very articulate mayor, to a hammer, all things look like a nail, and to say that the only existential threat to Corte Madera in the middle of a pandemic is naive. And beyond that, listening to the presentation, and I thank you. My question is, I recognize that money's already been spent, that we're not getting that money back, that's sunk cost, pun intended. But it's clear that the community wants a reworking of Section 3. So my question is, can we drop Section 3 in its entirety and begin anew? That's a question. Secondly, why are we doing this now? Like, why the sense of urgency today, now February, if there's a 10-year to 15-year timeline? So if we agree today, build a wall, do whatever it is. If we agree to do that now and it's done in 10 years, so now we have a wall that is 40 years ahead of your timeline as presented, which the other speakers don't agree that there's that's done too soon. And then as far as all this money spent on this plan, what you guys came up with was a wall, forced deterioration, a retreat plan, and mandatory notice to what would ultimately lower the values of the property. So I don't see the value in that money spent, and I'd like to see it reworked. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that comment. The next attendee is I will unmute, is Candy. Oh. Candy, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, I believe I am unmuted. Am I?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I tend to agree with the last caller, who essentially said he doesn't understand where the fire is, that all of us, that this needs to happen right now when we're looking at an impact, 30, possibly 40 years from now. But the other question really that I had was, does the $800,000 alternative analysis only include variations of a barrier? Or is it to look at alternatives to a barrier for other options that might be more acceptable to the community and might work just as well? There's a lot of things out there now. I personally am from New Orleans and very familiar with floodplains and floods. And there's a lot of options that people can put into place to try to mitigate water. And I think that that we need to probably look at some of those alternatives. That's my spiel.
Okay, thank you for the comment. And the next attendee I will call on will be Pat Ravazio. Pat, you should be able to.
Hi there. Thanks everybody for your work on this. Was so excited to know that Corte Madera was going to try to take this on and really try to get ahead of it. And my question is, I wasn't on this committee and have not been paying close attention to it, but what else was actually considered in addition to this wall? I know that there are alternative technologies being used all over the world. My particular question is, have we looked at floating homes? Sausalito does it successfully. There are other communities in island states that are learning how to make nature work for us by using her resources rather than fighting them. And I could see something happening where you build this nice crescent shape boardwalk and allow the people who are going to be experiencing flooding to have the option of building some kind of floating home. And there are large, beautiful ones. There's one in Sausalito designed by Sim Vanderen that you walk inside and it feels just like a beautiful, beautiful regular home. So I just wonder, what else did we look at? What made us suddenly automatically decide, it seems, that we need a wall? What about building up the soils? What are there other things that we can do, and have we really explored them? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Pat. The next attendee to make a comment will be Phil Boyle. Phil, you should be able to unmute yourself. Phil, are you able to unmute yourself? Okay, we will come back to Phil. Next on the list is Marta Sullivan. Marta, are you able to unmute yourself?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having us here. I want to pick up from something that Mr. Suoco and Mr. Cusimano said in the beginning. Mr. Suoco said that the CAP is just a set of ideas, and I agree, I understand that. But the moment the CAP is adopted by the town council, it stops being a set of ideas and becomes a legal document. So once town council adopts it, then in order to change any of the measures included in the CAP, another vote of the town council becomes necessary. So it's not a set of ideas. This is just about to become a binding legal document. And then once it's included in the general plan of the town, it becomes even harder for residents to affect it at all. So, I mean, we hear, you know, we've heard a lot of town staff minimizing the importance of the CAP and its adoption. But given that all future engineering study, environmental studies, cost-benefit studies, what gets studied will be determined by what's included in the CAP. I think that I would appreciate town staff not doing that. I understand that even once the CAP is adopted, if a barrier, if a levy is included in the CAP, residents will be able to comment on, you know, if they want this vegetation or that, if they want steps or maybe a little bit on the height. But the barrier item is going to stay. And given the level of disagreement and the opposition that is massive to the levy, you know, from public comments and our petition and letters to the town, I just don't understand why the levy is still in this set of ideas. Similar question for the retreat option. Couple more questions.
That was time. I'm sorry. My other question for RJ and Sasha. There are
Let's do
six. There's about 8 people that haven't spoken yet.
Raise your hand again. You can
let's go 15 more minutes and then do a round of responses, and then we'll come back and we'll do this again.
Okay. The next person I will unmute will be.
Sorry, maybe 10 minutes. Just want to be respectful of everyone's time.
Okay. J.R. Garibaldi, you should be able to unmute yourself. Hello? Mr. Garibaldi, can you hear us? We're not able to hear you. So I'm going to go ahead and mute you and leave your hand up, and we'll come back to you. The next commenter will be Stephen Bradley. Mr. Bradley, are you able to unmute yourself?
Hi, this is actually Mike Vogel. I'm using somebody else's computer. I live on Golden Hind. A couple comments. I'm curious as to why in the plan you talk about raising Lucky Drive to 10.7 NAVD 88. You talk about raising Paradise Drive to 11.6 NAVD. Yet you then determine, I'm going to build a wall at 15 NAVD 88. That makes no sense. If 10.7 is high enough for Lucky Drive, which is where most of the actual flooding in town comes from, why do you need 15 feet for a wall in our neighborhood where we actually don't flood from the tide? I'm also curious as to who decided where the wall is going to be. Was that taken from the old Army Corps engineer diagrams that were done 25, 30 years ago that were then determined not actually feasible? And lastly, what happens at the north end of the marsh above Lucky Drive and along the Green Bay Boardwalk where there's no wall? Because you're not Corte Madera, they're not Corte Madera, they're Green Bay and Larkspur. So if there's no tie-in with the neighboring communities, how does a wall and a levee in Corte Madera solve the problem when you're going to flood from the north end in Larkspur and Green Bay? So this is completely not a well-planned plan because you haven't coordinated with the neighboring communities. So I really do oppose putting this in a planned form without working with other communities.
Thank you. That time has expired. The next comment will be from Ian Rogers.
Hello, thank you for your time today. I would like to just first off say thank you so much to the CAP committee, the town council, the town manager on all their efforts and all their communication on this project. I've followed it through its flood control board stage in August. I'm following it now. I think the levee is a fantastic solution to protect the majority of the homes in Mariner Cove. Unfortunately, there's a few homes that will be impacted by their views being removed and reduced. It's probably 10% of the homes in Mariner Cove will have an effect on their view, while the other 90% of the homes will be protected from rising floodwaters. I agree that the retreat option is less than ideal and will have a big impact on home values, and I'd like to see the city rework that. But I believe if you're successful in option 1 or 2 of building a levee, that we won't need to retreat from the community. Thank you for your time today.
Okay, thank you. Let me reset the timer.
Let's do 2 more, Rebecca, and then we'll respond.
Yeah. The next raised hand is from Alicia Garibaldi. Are you able to mute yourself, Ms. Garibaldi? Just give it one more try. Oh, there, that's unmuted. Alicia, are you
Hello?
Oh, hello.
Well, hi, Rebecca. It's actually JR. I think I'm having some issues on the Zoom app, so I'm
okay.
taking my wife's time, if that's okay.
Noted. Okay, I'll start the timer.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for gathering. For those of you that have seen my letter, I don't think it will be a surprise that I think CAP misses the mark in a number of very key areas. I really do feel like we need to go into a lot more discussion as a community about some of these things. We've had a lot of time spent on the levy. Other than the last comment, I generally support everyone else that's talked about how it seems a little bit egregious given the science that was used and the very aggressive assumptions, and given the environmental sensitivities that we'll have. I don't know whether the $44 million estimate in the cap includes all of the potential legal costs and necessary condemnation and annexation of navigation easements and other rights that are attached to homeowners. I think it's well in excess of the 10% someone just suggested, especially when you start considering not just the levy, but the associated tidal gates that are likely to really destroy the entirety of the marsh. There's been a lot of talk on the levy, and I again echo a lot of the comments here. So I want to spend my 40 seconds on also highlighting these suggestions in the cap that we should be putting real estate disclosures on all of our homes, warning buyers about all of these threats, and potentially putting restrictions on our ability to make improvements to our homes. I think both of those, as a real estate professional, are frankly really poor ideas. I think they will really cause to further deteriorate our community when it's frankly, trending upwards as we are now. It'll dry up the buyer pool and, really depreciate our homes almost overnight with either of those measures. I think it sends a very dangerous message, and both of those items too, I think, really have no place in this cap.
Okay. Thank you. I think let's do a round of responses, Rebecca. So,
yeah. Oh, sorry, RJ. I was just going to say, it looks like we were trying to group the comments, and it looks like some of those, colored boxes there. A lot of questions about the planning process piece of it and what happens after the plan. And I don't know if that's a good place to start, or if you want to pick one of the other ones.
I've been taking notes on who's spoken so far.
Yeah.
So if we take up comments again, I'll be able to call on.
I'd like to address just kind of the support and the sea level rise assumptions. So I'm going to bring Jeremy on from San Francisco Estuary Institute to speak to that. Just really about the assumptions that went into those height levels, and I'll elaborate on how that may or may not apply to the cap in various sections of town.
Okay, thanks, RJ. This is I noted down Dr. Sullivan's question right at the beginning, referring to the 2018 guidance, and it's quite correct. That's the state guidance for the future projections of sea level rise as the state sees them at the moment. They're updated every 5 years or so, and they're what generally is used around the bay to give guidance on future planning of projects. He noted that Dr. Sullivan noted that the likely range of 66% gave certain elevations of 1.6 to 3.4 feet. It's important to look at those different columns, and I unfortunately I don't know if I can share my screen, but in doing that, the actual the different projections, the different ranges of height given to what you're trying to protect. Now, the most likely one is used for the low risk aversion one is used for things like which can get wet, which are valuable but they're not life threatening. So things like bay trails and so on are given as the example in the guidance. For things like housing developments, for houses and people, they suggest using the 1 in 200 or the 0.5% chance, which is the much higher level because there's risk involved of people and property being damaged. So the guidance there is to use for the 2100 the 6 feet or so, which was in the cap. There's also two ranges, one for low emissions and one for high emissions, depending upon what we as a planet do in terms of emitting greenhouse gas emissions. And unfortunately, we don't have a good record, maybe apart from this year, and we tended to exceed the emissions. So when you're using those tables, which are on page 18 of that guidance, and we can send out a link to that so that everybody can see those after the meeting. the guidance there from the state for the types of development that are in Mariners Cove and Marina Village are for using the more risk-averse numbers. Another point was made about San Francisco Airport, and I only saw that comment this afternoon, and just quickly looking up on the website, they're using a standard storm surge of 100 years. So they're expecting, they're designing their wall to protect it from a storm surge of a 100-year return period, which is a standard FEMA wall. And they're including 36 inches of sea level rise. And so that means, according to their website, around the shoreline, the design elevation could be 15 to 20 feet above current mean sea level. So that's similar type of range of numbers as being proposed here. I'm surprised that, and there's another question I saw in the chat. How do you convert between NAVD and mean levels? What's NAVD mean? Just coincidentally for San Francisco Bay, for Corte Madera, 0 feet NAVD datum is mean low water, approximately within a few inches. So if you think of height above mean low water, the lowest tide you see, and add on the 10 or 15 feet, that's the elevations you see.
We'll come back to that slide.
Okay.
So again, I thought it was important just to give some of the backup on how we arrived at our numbers in the draft document. Again, that doesn't mean that's what we're going to build or what we're, it's just, that's the backup. And we've had a process, and we've had a lot of people involved throughout the process, and they have followed the understanding, and we didn't until recently take objections to that. We're hearing it now. And so we plan on revisiting that, but it is based on kind of Bay Area standards. And to the comment about, Lucky Drive and Paradise Drive, again, those are, Lucky Drive or Paradise Drive, it's a roadway, no home. So, if it overtops once every 5 or 10 years, I don't know who wants to drive in a 100-year storm with high tides anyway. What destruction does it cause, compared to, that occurring on a home one time? And kind of a little bit of a similar thing for Lucky Drive. So that kind of explains the difference there. The same comment, there was also a comment about the berm behind Trader Joe's, and we have been in coordination with both Larkspur and the county, and it's very likely or possible that if we did initiate a project along the Smart Railroad, that we would do that as a partner project. But again, as the agency, town of Corte Madera, we're not trying to speak on behalf of those other agencies. So again, there is collaboration going on. They are aware of it. They've been involved in our community advisory groups. So, but it's a fair point, and I'm glad to be able to share that with you. Can we go to the settlement slide? I want to speak to that just so we kind of get our basis on some of these, vulnerability levels. If you're able to do that, Alex or Sasha. I believe it was slide 23. So yeah, I believe it was Roy mentioned settlement. So this is actually a table for Corte Madera, speaking of, the various settlement depths based on the amount of bay mud. So here, you'll see in the second column from the left, calculated settlement to date as of 2006, based on the various bay mud level thicknesses. And if I can, I'm going to try to show my screen. It's a little tight, but we do have some data as to these contours represent the depth of bay mud in various areas. So here I'm following the 100-foot line. I'm going in, here's the 90-foot line. Here's the 80-foot line. So again, there is some, and if we can put the table back up. So we are applying, you know, engineering data, engineering concepts. As part of the alternatives analysis, it'll be this level analysis times 10 or more. You know, we're really just trying to ballpark, you know, can we even initiate some of these processes based on costs and what things may, you know, what are we even able to do as a town? There's the reality is there's most jurisdictions, they don't have the funding mechanisms or revenue to even broach this subject. So they're just letting it lie. Luckily, you know, we have a council that wants to do everything possible within our means, and staff as well that wants to, you know, do everything within our means to safeguard our communities. And so that's why we're, you know, and some people, you know, ahead of the pack, if you will. Let's go back to the comment sheet. Okay. So again, yeah, on the, you know, 800,000 process, yeah, that really, we're open to looking at anything that would solve the goals, which, you know, again, is to protect from sea level rise. So new alignments, different types of barriers. You know, we've used the ones that have been brought up, that we've, you know, done the research on, that have been used elsewhere. More than welcome to consider any and all other ideas. You know, again, we don't have an interest or, you know, we're not investing in sheet piles or block walls. We're just trying to find what is the ultimate, what is the best solution for everyone. And there was a point about kind of weights, I think. And so, yeah, you know, some of those block walls and sheet pile walls have the ability to be lighter weight or possibly a zero net weight if you remove some existing soil. Let's see, Sasha, we missed, what other key questions do you see here?
Yeah, so I think you touched on, you know, some of the science behind it, the coordination and planning down in that pink box. You know, you talked about how the goal is really to enhance resilience for the town and the region, and some of these solutions are multifaceted. And so I think your point about, you know, this being an initial screening of what's feasible and then continuing collaboration with neighboring communities is important. There were some questions up in this upper right-hand corner about like continued work with a group of community members. And Adam, you have your hand up. So
I was just going to say, is there a way to make that bigger? I'm just worried that some of the members who are viewing this may not be able to see the full, yeah, see the language on that.
Oops.
Yeah,
I don't know if we want to spend a little bit of time about that.
Yeah, a little bit on the, you know, the policy side, or at least some of these disclaimers. You know, through the comments, I think we've discussed internally, and we think, you know, we could see the value in pulling those out of the document. You know, we'll have to revisit each one individually, but we see, you know, a large of those going away, and that maybe it's a little preliminary to put those in, but I do want to just say that those are important things that we'll need to discuss in the near future. You know, there's implications that could happen tomorrow related to certain policies. And let's say someone, you know, one policy could be to streamline raising houses to get out of the flood zone, but, you know, how much raising is too much? So if someone proposes a 3-foot rise, maybe, you know, everyone's okay with it. But what if someone proposes 7 feet, you know, and we've created this streamlined process, or, you know, so these are things that we need to get in front of, so we have it vetted with the community before they, you know, come to the forefront.
Hey, RJ.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Sasha. Did you have something, Sasha?
Oh, I was just going to say it might be useful to kind of bring up that kind of timing slide to just think about like which policies would potentially come before other policies, but we don't have to do that at this moment.
Hey, RJ, a couple things jump out at me just hearing the conversation a little bit, and I think it's good for everyone to hear it and for us to have it as staff. This is a living document. So I think Marta used it that this is a legal document and it ties it to the general plan. Well, that has meaning legally, and that's not exactly correct. And so, you know, Adam, if you could jump in there at some point and really clarify that, I think that's good for everyone to know, and also your town manager, because it's always an education. But there's a couple other points. We're not about to put our head in the sand, so to speak, and just go, hey, let someone else worry about this 10 years, 20, 30 years. We're going to solve the issues of this town over the next 50. And this is a menu of options. It's a living document. So to that point, you know, this is a challenge now to staff as we challenge our community to really think ahead, right, to protect us. For the staff, I think JR had some really good points about the disclosures. At some point that may be necessary, but is it a legal responsibility of the town of Corte Madera to have that in this document at this point? At some point down the road, it may. And this is a living document. And so if it's a living document, we may want to consider that down the road. And so to have an upfront conversation about that, I think that's something we absolutely need to talk about. And also, it hasn't been brought up yet, but it has been brought up in a lot of the emails, and it touches a key point from my standpoint of like, at what point, if we didn't do anything, and, you know, let's just think worst case, and we actually, because there's some language in there about potentially like halting to future development in that area, and so, in Mariner Cove. And so again, that's one of, this is a living document, and if our intention is truly to protect Mariner Cove and think outside the box, does that really need to be in a document as an option right now? It's a living document. If 15 years, 20 years from now it becomes an issue, then we'll talk about it then. At least we set up the leadership and the residents to have that conversation later. We did our part. Lastly, or I'm sorry, two more points. The other one is I think, who brought it up? I think Mike brought it up about, you know, our plan is only as good as our neighbors. Well, one of the things we felt important about is once we had all this documentation from all these reports of like, look, here's how we're being impacted as a town, we need to develop strategies and options to really, you know, how do we attack this thing? And so we have engaged, and we really, this should be a county of Marin kind of conversation, a region conversation, just moving together. But a lot of people don't want to pay the money. A lot of people are, you know, they're pushing it, kicking the can down the line, so to speak. And we don't want to do that, but we are absolutely engaged. RJ comes from the county of Marin, has a lot of contacts with the county of Marin. We engage them constantly in all of our projects today, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, same with Larkspur. So you have to believe anything that we're going to do, we're going to tie this into the big picture plan of the county and everything they do. The other piece that I think that we should think about is the alternative analysis, because again, it keeps coming up, and it's a great question. Someone brought it up that, hey, are you just looking at a sea level wall? Is that your only solve here? Do we have any other options? And so it's a great question of the scope of work of what that would look like. I think we really need to vet that at some point in this conversation too, of what that looks like, because, you know, it might not be the only option. And again, this climate adaptation conversation, this is a menu of options. And so really it gets into that second and third piece of the conversation, RJ and team, that we need to explain to everyone of like, what is like some factual information, because we don't have factual information right now of like, this is the only thing, this is the only option, and this is what it looks like. We don't have that because that's not the step in the process. This is, look, we need to have a menu and we need to have options down the road. And what I think you'll hear with the settlement and where we are currently, we need to start positioning ourselves, because these are 10-year processes to even get there to where we could break ground on something. There is going to be litigation potentially, and that's okay, you know, but these are long processes. So the time is now to have this conversation is all I'm saying. But I do think staff also, we need to challenge ourselves. If this is a living document and there's something that brings consternation to our community, it's okay to have the conversation up front and understand where we're headed and what we need to talk about today and 10, 15, 20 years from now. But if it's a living document that we can, if we're not there today, we can certainly, we don't have to have necessarily that option in a document. The most important thing is to really move this thing forward at some point to set up our future leaders with a matrix of decisions to engage our community with. That's the gift that's our legacy. That's what we need to do here. And that's my point. And I'll stop there. And if, Adam, if you could speak specifically though, because Marta brought up a good point, and it's an important one for those that may not have caught it. This is not a legal document that binds us, and it's not tied to our general plan.
Yeah. Sure, Todd. Yeah, and I think just going back to library of choices we've talked about menu of options. I think it's also important just to recognize that as we, and Sasha, maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, because the draft that we put out there really selected from there's a whole host of many other strategies that we've discussed through the process of developing this climate adaptation plan. The actual document pulls from that and selected a few of just to highlight, but there's many more that we're going to go into sort of this actual library, what I would call sort of a toolkit that lives in an appendix of this plan that talks about things like, of course, collaboration with our neighbors and with other partners is going to be important. That is a strategy that we need to think about, and that is in the plan. It just wasn't sort of pulled into the highlighted sections of the document that is in the draft now. Many others as well are included in that we should be thinking about and considering as, again, options and tools going forward that may at some point in the future be sort of come to the forefront. Sasha, as well, I think we've talked about the adaptation pathways as a way to sort of think about this, and certain options and certain strategies really come to the fore once we hit certain moments in time based on the science or actual sea level rise in the future, that actually brings some of these other strategies to the fore, and maybe those are the times when we need to consider those things. So it's a way to think about this challenging issue, and I would just stress that. As to the document itself, because as we're describing it, we've never really talked about this being adopted at this point in time as part of an addendum or an update to the general plan. I certainly recognize that there is state law that requires that we do think about this stuff in the future by a certain, I think it's by after 2022, if we update our general plan, and we'll be doing so with our housing element, we do need to think about updating our safety element and incorporating things related to climate change. But that's not what's happening right now. And so I want to be very clear about that. In fact, the county in the past has been working on local hazard mitigation plans. Those also deal with climate adaptation. And those plans encompass, basically was a coordinated effort back in 2018. The last one that we did included all the jurisdictions in Marin County in a collaborative effort to sort of speak to the issues of climate change. So there's a lot of other efforts going on. We're trying to do what we think is, we keep harping on this, but what is sort of start the conversation and start thinking about how to plan for the future and really strategize about what sort of things make sense for our community to start engaging on. And so that's the goal here. But speaking, Todd, just to that point, yeah, it's not, we haven't considered this at all as part of a general plan update. And so I'll just, that's specific to that question that came up.
Yeah, and to Marta's point, I mean, I know I've said it a couple times, I'll say it again. This, if we get, approval to start with an alternatives analysis process, we are fully open to looking at additional alignments, different heights, all sorts of scenarios that are not in this cap. So I just want that to be very clear. And there's going to be 3 to 5 or more public workshops over 2 to 3 years. And we hope all of you are participating and can really be a part of that if we get the green light to initiate that next step. Can we throw up the elevation slide, the orange and red one? But as the town engineer, I can't sit here and say that you have risk now, and that's the reality. How much risk, I can't quantify it, but based on the elevations here, and this is LiDAR taken from 2012. LiDAR data typically is about accurate to about 6 inches or so. We know king tides are 7 to 7.4 as of now. You get a storm in there on a high tide event, and there's going to be issues. So, and again, anything from if we're talking about a flood barrier type project, that's really a 10-year project. So, how much longer do you want to wait? How much risk are you willing to take? There is risk right now, and I don't know if Jeremy, you want to speak to anything about more of the wave velocities or anything on that, but and I didn't quite highlight it when I was showing the settlement table. Many of the areas have up to 3.2 feet of additional settlement to occur. So you add that to the conversation, I mean, there's risk.
RJ, I appreciate that comment that the challenges really are real for the community, and it's working together to figure out the best solutions for it. I do want to highlight just this, this kind of table that sort of lays out, where we are today with sea level rise, potential for the next few decades, and then by the end of the century. And this is to Adam's point that, you can do nothing. The town community could choose to not take action now, or it could choose to do a mix of some of these other policies, and I don't know, Adam, if you could jump in and maybe speak, just a little bit more about some of the flood, accommodation policies that have been considered as part of the process. And then it feels like we need to shift back and, allow for more community input and comments, and then come back to, furthering the conversation and keep the dialogue going.
Yeah, and I will say, part of what, the approach from, I will tell you from the planning side of things, and I'll just differentiate, the planning side of things, we're going to deal more with the private property and the regulations that affect private property. But, I think we take the philosophy of really, this is about accommodation. I mean, many people are currently raising their homes, or required to. If you're, many of you in the community have been through this probably. We want to remove barriers to allow you to do that. Let's make this community more resilient, and try to remove and streamline processes to allow people to raise their homes without sort of the design review process encumbering that, the costs associated with that. But, we should have the conversation that is going to raise heights of structures there, that may change some of the character, and we have to think about that. But, those are the types of accommodation questions about through that process, which again would require additional public outreach and discussion. But through that process, are questions of, do we want to include additional freeboard that doesn't just meet the FEMA requirements, but actually plans for future additional, as we know, the FEMA elevation and requirements keep increasing every time they update the map. So in any case, those are the types of things. Accommodation, assuming that we're going to be figure out a way, whatever that way is, to protect the area out there, moving well into the future, and that's the approach we're going to take to.
So if I can add to that real quick, and so I mean, if you look at Foster City, I mean, they are building a FEMA approved barrier to stay out of the flood zone and not pay flood tax. I can't sit here and commit that is going to happen, but it's a scenario that would be analyzed as part of the alternative analysis process. That might be an option. So that could be a positive here. You have a system that's vetted by FEMA as being a confident barrier of such. So There's pros and cons to both. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the pros and cons and like the alternatives are really important. And we're getting a number of comments, you know, that it would be nice to just hear a little bit more about some of the other structural interventions that are being explored and considered. And so I wonder if it would be a good time to have Ellen talk a little bit about some of the nature-based solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can talk a little bit about some of those options, and some of these are outlined in the report, and there are opportunities to bring in some nature-based options in this area, including potential options like eelgrass and oyster reefs, potentially augmenting mudflats, adding coarse beaches. But I do want to note that these measures tend to be most effective for the goals of reducing wave heights, so attenuating waves, and promoting the longevity of shoreline habitats in the long term. They don't necessarily protect against long-term rise in stillwater elevations. And so when you're talking about feet of sea level rise on top of those storm events and the waves, a hybrid solution is more likely to be effective. So where you can have a barrier and then try to soften that barrier and attenuate waves that have a more natural shoreline. And so in this area in Corte Madera, I think it's something that we've started through this CAP process is coordination and conversations with partners, including CDFW and Marin Audubon, folks who are working on nature-based adaptation for the marsh in this area. And I think, depending on interest from the town, that coordination could continue, and nature-based options could be paired with other options to help protect the Mariner Cove and Marina Village area. It's just not necessarily something that nature-based solutions can do on their own, considering the still water elevations that we'll be facing in the future.
Yeah, on that note, I'd like to help everyone understand that better. There's the slide, Sasha, that has the still water elevation plus the wave height plus the kind of calculation there. And then we'll move to the cross section so we can really make sure everyone understands that concept.
Yeah, and then we should have another comment period.
Yeah.
Is this the one you were thinking?
Yeah, that one. So again, under this guidance of 3.5 feet of additional sea level rise, we're taking a mean high water plus that 3.5 feet, factoring a 100-year storm. Again, we can talk about whether that's too conservative or not. Then we have this wave run up from that storm. That's 2 feet. That is where that nature-based solution is going to really come into play. So meaning if you have that sloped beach in front of that vertical, whatever structure or earthen mound, you now don't need that additional 2 feet. So now we're talking 13 feet. So if we can go to the cross section on 24. That one. So essentially, many of those homes are at 7 to 8 feet elevation. So with that nature-based solution, which cancels out the 2 feet of run up, we still need something, some vertical something up to 13 feet. So, again, and I think that's been a little bit of a disconnect with some of the comments we're seeing is that, we could build a beach out for, a mile. It doesn't save us from that still water elevation. We still need something to be built up.
All right, we have, I think, like 10 members with their hands up, so it feels like we should shift back to that. Rebecca, can you help us?
Yes, sir. Let me start the timer. Okay, the next attendee with a raised hand that hasn't already spoken is Vince Tunn.
Yes, hi there. Thank you. I live on Golden Hind. Purchased there 18 months ago with my wife and family. We bought the house because it's water access and has outstanding views. Our house was completely rebuilt in 2007. my question is you know, the mayor lives 10 houses away. He knows the neighborhood apparently. And I'd like to invite him over and have a look at our house. We've got a seawall that'll hold the water to a 10-foot tide. We've got a foundation system that allows for settling. So I have a solution, you know, for that problem. And then, you know, building a levee in front of our house is gonna, you know, drive our property values down millions of dollars. And there doesn't seem to be much in the CAP plan that talks about other solutions. It's 80% levy and 20% other solutions. We're living in another solution. Our house is the solution. And I'd like to invite you guys over to take a look at it. And, you know, and this thing about the living document, I'm so tired of that terminology, living document. Once this thing gets added to the general plan, it's not a living document. It's part of the plan. And the only way it can be changed at that point is another vote. And it can't just be changed at the whim of the city council. So please, you know, don't say living document over and over again, because I just don't believe it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I can add one more thing, this levee that you're proposing out there, it's going to sink into the water before it's even going to be useful. You know, you're building a 25-year levee for a 50-year plan. I don't understand that at all. It's a poor use of the of everybody's time and money.
Okay, thank you for your comments. The next attendee I will allow to talk will be Steve Musser. Mr. Musser, are you able to unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
While I'm thinking of it, I want to agree with Vince and his consideration of living document. I don't believe in the concept of a living document. Once this thing gets published, that's going to be the foundation of whatever grows beyond it. So that said, another comment that I would like to make, Marta and the Garibaldis put a lot of time and energy into writing 2 extensive letters to the town council. And I hope that you've all seen those letters, you've received those letters and have paid attention to them. At this point in time, we're completely on board really with their feelings and everything they have to say about it. We've spent most of this time now talking about levies, and in your comment section there, you talked about levies. Nobody from the consulting group here has talked about the retreat language. And the retreat language is the deal killer here. I think that's what everyone's concerned about. There's a gentleman who lives in the neighborhood who's not concerned about levies, but he too voiced concern about the retreat language. The day this thing gets published and becomes part of the plan, all of Mariner Cove is, the homes are going to be devalued significantly. We all have guesses, and we've all talked to our realtors in terms of what that might be. And whatever number you come up with, it's significant. Why there's retreat language in this document, I don't know. Does San Francisco have retreat language? Does New Orleans have retreat language? Does New York City have retreat language? Does Amsterdam have retreat language? I don't believe any of these people have retreat language. Larkspur and Greenbrae, they don't have retreat language. And here we are, 500 yards from them, from my back door, and we will have
retreat. Time has expired, thank you. The next public comment would be from Kay Mig Hoffman. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So I'm sort of, I posted something in the Q&A and you haven't yet answered it. But most of the research out there indicates that a levee doesn't work when you have high, rainfall and runoff. And I'm kind of curious why we're pursuing the suggestion of a levee when most of the data out there from Scientific American, MIT says they don't work in this type of georegion. So if you could comment on that, you guys have some good data, but nobody's answered this question. Thanks.
Thank you. The next comment will be from Scott Shell. Scott, are you able to mute yourself?
Yes, I am. Thank you. And thanks for your work on this. So I'm Scott Shell, 223 Golden Hind. I'm also a principal at EHCD Architects. We've designed major projects on the coast all over California and work regularly with the Coastal Commission and BCDC and geotechnical engineers and so forth. And I just got to say, I'm just shocked at the proposal for these levies. I didn't believe it when I first started hearing about it. For me, frankly, I know it's well intentioned and people did what they thought was right, but we're all living here on this waterfront every day, and the idea that we need an 8-foot wall to protect us just doesn't pass the sniff test. I've been here for 15 years and we're not flooding. We don't get water in our backyard. And to think that we need an 8-foot wall, I'm just flabbergasted. The slide you showed earlier with the two risk scenarios, it was based on a high emission scenario. And I think there's just a lot of uncertainty. I follow climate change really closely. It's something I'm passionate about. I design labs for climate scientists. And I've been really encouraged with some of the news coming out in recent days. All the car companies are now getting on board with the 50+ mile per gallon by 2025. Joe Biden has pledged to get to a zero emissions electric grid by 2035. And I think these business as usual emission scenarios are just all wrong. And they're going to lead to making real changes and damages to our quality of life. In the meantime, I think we need to take those sections out with the levies in that chapter 3, take them out and, give us time to look at what the actual emissions are going to be and what the actual sea levels rises are going to be. I just frankly don't find them credible at all. Thank you.
Thank you. The next comment will be from Chris Coughlin. Chris, are you able to unmute?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, with all due respect to RJ, I completely disagree with saying that this living document can be changed here and there. When the words are in there, they're in there. And I agree with Vince and Steve that the levy wording should be completely removed. And luckily we have time. And RJ made a comment that we're living risk right now. And I respectfully disagree. We have time on this. And none of us have said that we don't think sea level is rising. We just think we have time. And we do have time to come together as a neighborhood, as a community, and really think about something that works for everybody. We can do that. So I don't know why it's being rushed now. I would ask that you do not adopt this plan next month, that we push it back, give us time. And one last thing on the people that do live on the water and back in San Clemente Creek, there is a navigation easement, which means we don't have any authority anyway to build a levee. Thank you.
Thank you. The next comment will be from Jason Carlin. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, I am. Are you there?
Okay. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to echo a lot of the sentiments on here about the abandon and retreat and kind of what I feel is kind of overreaching in the wording. Two questions that haven't been answered yet by the council, and I think drastically need to be answered by the end of the conversation is, what is the hurry? Why do we have to have this vote next month? And my proposal would be that, you know, at the very least, we should look at another, you know, 6 to 12 month period where you guys bring in counsel of the community and have it on a little bit different form than this, but something that would allow us to be involved in the planning, because, you know, our livelihoods are at stake. That's, you know, one of my main concerns. You know, if you talk about the health of the community, our property values are a large part of our net worth here and our retirement and so forth. And I think that a lot of the wording is very irresponsible and can actually be a detriment to the community, just like a lot of other people have said. And I would vote for removal of the abandon and retreat. I think it's overly aggressive. I mean, if this is truly a working document, living, breathing document, which, you know, we all know that you guys are not going to be around as city council members in Corte Madera for the next 50 years. And living, breathing documents tend to get misconstrued over time. And so, you know, not allowing for the community to advance by getting permits and building and remodeling and so forth is just an overreach by a city government. So I'd like to see all that language removed and address what the hurry is.
Thank you. The next comment will be from Bob Bundy. Are you able to unmute?
This has been very interesting with a lot of good comments and all the concerns voiced. One of the points that I wanted to make is that a number of neighbors have done a lot of work over the years to protect their properties, to tie in with their neighbors, to prevent flooding in their own backyard and garages and flooding that goes between the houses and into the street. Vince's home is a good example of that with, you know, 10-foot of berm that has been created in his backyard. So there will not be the need for any kind of additional berm or barrier for many, many decades. Whereas if you go down the street, we have a very low spot at the ebb tide sanitary pump station that floods regularly at 6.5-foot tides, and DPW has to go in and put out flooding signs. I don't think they need an 8-foot barrier behind their houses, but they probably need to start with something in the range of a 2-foot berm that ties together over the 10 or 11 houses that are all low and experience backyard flooding, garage flooding, and street flooding at king tides. I also want to comment in regard to the idea of the levee and the outer tide gate. I also think that we need to respect navigation rights. People enjoy kayaking, paddleboarding, and water activities, and we shouldn't block that off. There's concern that the tide gate may need to be closed permanently at some point. That's really the worst case scenario, where we haven't gotten our act together, lowered greenhouse emissions, and we see tides going into the 2100s of 6-7 feet of sea level rise, which means that the high tide is going to be 14 or 15, and the low tide is going to be 7 or 8. And
okay, that was time was expired.
Flood. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next comment will be from Sandy Park. Oops. Are you able to unmute yourself?
So with respect to everyone's time, I'm wondering if we want to address these 8 hands up and then return for comment.
Well, there's only one more after this who hasn't already spoken.
Got it. Okay.
Oh, actually, there's 2 more who haven't.
Okay. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thank you.
Start.
This is Sandy Park. I live on Golden Hind. I've lived here for 14 years. And we moved here, invested a lot of money in our property on the water, and raised our house. We raised and fortified our seawall. We added fill to our backyard and did what we felt was necessary to protect us from global warming and rising tide. I think that each of the properties along the shoreline has different infrastructure issues, and we really wish the town had communicated this better. Most of us found out about it in the IJ, and we were told that this has been ongoing for 2 years. None of the people that I know on the shore were contacted by the town council to discuss kind of individual home issues and the effects of this, which is really disappointing. I think that there's been a scramble now to communicate with us to try to put a Band-Aid on that situation, and I think it's really unfortunate. Since I've lived here, my house is right in the middle of your picture of the diagram of the houses that are at risk. I've never had water in my yard except from the street, with runoff from storms that are trying to get to the bay and can't get to the bay. So I think that we're fishing in the wrong pond here with the high tides, where we could handle that with individual solutions for homes being raised and fortifying the seawalls along the water. I think it's the infrastructure underneath the streets and the storm drains that have to be put at issue. And you could note that over the last 14 years, like I said, I haven't had water in my yard, while friends in Ross, San Anselmo, and Mill Valley, 5 miles from the bay, are underwater. So I'd like to redirect this and scrub this and try to look at solutions that could benefit our home values. Thank you.
Thank you. The next comment will be from Andrew Musselman.
Hello, hello, is this working?
Yes.
All right, I had a very quick comment about something on page 90 mentioned in the Q&A section. There is currently a set of bay trail and public shore out along a dike, which is on page 90, slated to be removed. And I know that Golden Gate Bridge Highway and Transportation District has just recently done some rework, reclaiming some areas of the marsh and raising some of them to a hill in this same area. And I'm wondering if this plan, this part of the plan was done before that work was done, or if there really isn't a plan to abandon that access to public shore and public bay trail out in that area. I think that should be, I think that's my whole comment.
Thank you. The next comment will be from Joel Kleinfeld. Are you able to unmute? Joel? Joel Kleinfeld, are you able to unmute?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah, so I live next door to Vince. I moved here about 15 months ago with my family, obviously to have enjoy the view and have the water in our backyard. Frankly, we're scared to death to put any more money into the house in the backyard based on this potential cap in the levee. So we think it's critical, not repeating some of the great points, but there needs to be a committee with actually people from our neighborhood to really look at options going forward to address these issues. And I think really that's the next step in order to have a really good community partnership working with the town and looking at the best options. So I just want to make it short and sweet.
Thank you. And then the next comment will be from James Jordan, and then that would end those who have raised hands who haven't commented already. Mr. Jordan, are you able to unmute your phone?
Hi, everybody. Jim Jordan, Mohawk Avenue. We bought our house in 1985, and there was a flood in 1982. Our house had a watermark inside about 4 feet up on the walls. I asked a neighbor who lived here in 1982, what direction did the water come from? To my surprise, she said, the water came up out of the ground, through the ground. And everything that I see about sea level rise, it's real. Look at the news, look at the country, look at the world. It's happening, and there's going to be much more than 1.5 foot sea rise by the end of the century. It's likely going to be that in 2050. And it's no secret that Corte Madera has a big problem. Corte Madera is sometimes used as the example of a location where somebody has to take some action to address this. And I think we have to trust science. I have some difficulty accepting that this is going to happen, but all the scientists in the know say that it is going to happen. And I think the staff has done a good job so far. I observed 2 of these sessions before, and they're putting a lot of thought into this. They're allowing public input. They're saying we're just starting. There's going to be a lot of changes, a lot of considerations made as we go forward. And I was surprised to see a newspaper article in the IJ about the people on the east side of town objecting to the seawall and the floodgate, and some saying that the town is telling them they have to retreat. Now, in the prior meetings on this, retreat wasn't really talked about because that's the last option. The town isn't saying we're going to have to retreat, but if you're not going to retreat, how are you going to stop the water? There has to be a barrier. There has to be a seawall and a floodgate. And some say, why the urgency? It is urgent. It's 2021. 5 years to plan, 10 years to start doing something. It's 2031.
Okay, time has expired. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more new hand did pop up from Roger Lyon.
Okay, let's
actually, unfortunately, I got a notification that says allow to talk is not available because the caller is using an older version of Zoom. Shoot, it does say I can promote to panels to allow him to talk. Mr. Lyon, are you able to unmute? This is new. I haven't seen that notification before. If this doesn't work, it may not work. Mr. Lyon, are you able to share your unmute and share your comment? Okay, that didn't work either. I would recommend that the comments be answered into the Q&A chat bar. I'm sorry we couldn't make that work.
Okay. Team, if there's no more questions, can I jump in just for 1 second, just because we're running out of time, and I want to.
There was one more person who hasn't spoken yet. Should I call on that person first?
Yes.
It's Corte Madera resident. No name, just says Corte Madera resident. Would you be able to unmute?
Hi, 56-year resident on Yolo Street. Used to kayak down on harbor when it would flood. Haven't been able to do that, sadly, in quite a few years. My only concern is that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I feel as if this is being rushed down our throats when not the entire town is able to commit to paying attention. I think if you had more people in the process, which I get it, you've advertised, you've sent emails, I'm getting the stuff. You have to be living under a rock not to be receiving it. It's a question of having the time to pay attention. We're trying to keep our children alive, mentally healthy, and we're trying to be good parents and good citizens while all this is taking place. And frankly, this is not on anyone's agenda. We're trying to get through a pandemic. Let's slow it down and stop talking about living documents, legal documents, and agree maybe we need to just slow things down and get 55% participation instead of 2% participation. That's all I gotta say. Love what you guys are doing. I know you're committed. I believe in what you're doing, and I appreciate you more than you'll ever know. I just say we gotta slow it down. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then that concludes those who have raised hands who have not yet spoken.
RJ and team, if I could, if you allow me, I don't have the authority to do this, but I'm certainly, I think, just always sitting back and hearing the conversation on both sides, trying to really find a path to move forward. I think good government is thinking ahead and problem solving. This is a living document, with all due respect to my fellow friends on this call, you know, there's 400 to 500, I think, in the appendix, problem solving measures over the next 50 plus years in this document. And so there is no one project that takes priority over another that is green lighted. You know, any of these options, 400 to 500 options, are opportunities to further be discussed, mitigated, and ultimately approved by the council. But I hear you loud and clear. I think we all do. And RJ, you know, again, I don't have this authority, but, you know, I think it's something we have this discussion with the council. I think two things are, because it is a living document, and I know people don't want to hear it, but it has to be. This is a living document today and over the next 50 years. That's the intent of it. And so by that very means, and by walking the walk to this team, I would say at a minimum, we need to immediately just take kind of two things off this table. And if it comes up in the future, we'll deal with it. And I think they're specific. I'm sorry, I'm just going to my notes. I think it goes to the disclosure discussion that was brought up by people, and also the redevelopment conversation. We should take those out of the document as options. If they become issues in the future, we'll deal with them. We need to show that we're listening. Our residents clearly do not want that language. They're concerned about it. We should consider taking it out. I think as it relates to retreat, our intent is to protect the house, as we said, and find alternatives to do that as necessary as we move forward into the future. And so if that's true, you know, I also challenge the team to give it some thought before we go back to council in the future on the word retreat. You know, do we have to have it? Is that something we can add later at a later point? Or do you really clearly define at what point you would consider that? The last piece is the wall, you know, this barrier. There's a lot of different opportunities for that in both height, distance from the parcels that we're talking about on Golden Hind, but also there's other options to possibly be considered. And so the alternative analysis, as we discuss this with council, what are those? And if we have to sit here and spend, you know, we're 18 months into the process. So everyone on this call, I want to just, this is my little pitch to you. We've made communication our #1 issue. We want to communicate with you. Social media, mail, you know, the last caller said it perfectly, so I won't go any farther than that. Please go to our website. Please sign up for our newsletter. Please look at what we have on there, because that is our intent, to engage you so you get information real time. This is important stuff. We need to deal with it now, but we hear you. You know, it's true that we have a grant and we wanted to meet the needs of that grant. It saved us a few $100,000 of taxpayer money to really piggyback with Caltrans and start this 2-year process. We're almost 2 years into it, and we're here right now with this conversation. And so again, this is where it's not my authority, but I'm happy to take it back to council and say, hey, we're going to lose the grant, but let's continue this conversation. If the community and the residents in this neighborhood are not concerned as we are in our information, I hear, okay, then we'll pivot and we'll move forward. I think the devil's in the details. Words matter, like we all said. It's in that alternative analysis and what should be involved in there. And I think staff, we might need to spend more time really thinking of what should that analysis consider. The options of a sea level wall, but also options of raising houses, whatever those options are, with the feedback of our residents. You know, let's look at that and move forward. But I think at a minimum, we should really challenge ourselves with this living document, because it is, with, you know, taking a couple of these conversation pieces off the table so we can focus really on what are the options if they come to fruition. And he didn't have a lot of time, but I really Wilford, you know, on some of his information too, of just kind of moving forward too, of when we do the alternative analysis, whatever that ends up being, and whatever's reasonable or not in our priorities as a community, having the real data where you have that just simple monitor out in the bay or whatever, where we can see it. And when it hits here, we know we're going here, right? I mean, that's really the goal. You know, having 500 options in how we handle climate change isn't helpful, because you can't really make decisions. It's difficult. And so, you know, whatever that is, in a really simplistic way, I think we hear our neighbors loud and clear. We're trying to do the right thing. We are not trying to infringe on anyone's property rights, or we're trying to protect the property values. We're trying to ultimately make sure you don't have to have flood insurance. We don't want you to lose flood insurance. That's what we're doing. And so anyone that says we have time, we're in the next 5 years, a lot of those residential units out in Mariner Cove are going to lose flood insurance if we don't do anything. So, but there's a lot of options. Hopefully there's a lot of options on the table for us to consider. And I think we have your attention now. So let's engage and do the work. Again, I don't have that authority. The council does, but I think staff, we should at least take a couple of things off the table and focus on what we need to talk about, the alternative analysis, take something to council and have them make that call to allow us to have some more time to extend the contracts of our great consultants and team and really do the work over the next however long it takes. Because if this is a living document for the next 50 years, $200,000 or losing a grant or spending 6 months is absolutely worth it. And so I think that's where we're at. That's what I recommend. But I'll turn it back over to the team for any comments or closing discussion.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that and say, you know, we do really appreciate all the comments. We take them to heart. We take them very seriously. I know, you know, there's a lot of people who haven't been with us through the whole process, but we really have listened and tried to incorporate. And regardless of it being kind of late in our plan process, we're still going to do that now. And to Todd's point, we're gonna take a hard look at all that stuff and really see what we can do to make this a better document. If that means waiting, we'll consider that. We do also have an additional flood board meeting next Monday, the 8th, that we are going to also discuss this topic. So there is another opportunity to provide additional comments. You know, I don't know if it's worth it. I'm happy to go back and answer some of the questions we just heard. But I also, you know, this also could be a good leaving point, just kind of this continued dialogue kind of emphasis. And so I don't know if you guys have a sense of what you want to do with, I know we're at 6:30, you know, we go a little over, but, you know, I don't know what you guys have a sense of whether we should go into some of those details or not.
I just think that, you know, there's some misinformation, there's concern. People, you know, for us, we've been talking about this for 18 to 24 months. And for some of our fellow residents and really smart people on this call, you know, it's just been brought to their attention in the last couple of weeks. And so we need to, I think we need to step back, acknowledge that, yes, we're, like I said, the disclosures and some of these other things, we should take that off the table and really focus on what other options are available to us and really have that discussion like we had the last 18 months with our residents and, you know, and come back, you know, with whatever we need to do. And so I think we need to, you know, communicate that to Caltrans, understand what that means. That's okay. And, you know, bring something to council to have a public discussion of buying ourselves more time. We're going to have to extend some of the contracts.
Well, just to clarify, yeah, the alternatives analysis would be, we have to go out for a request for proposal for a whole different set of consultants. Not that these guys aren't great. We need kind of engineering heavy and not to just want that. There's going to be a time element there that just want everyone to understand. And then for anyone who does, and I hope everyone does participate in the further discussion of the flood control board on Monday, the 8th, just go ahead and we can put it in the chat bar maybe, but just Google flood control board, Corte Madera, and there'll be a link to that meeting. I believe it starts at 6:30.
And RJ, and Todd, can I just jump in for a second? There are a number of comments we've gathered, like we have all the comments and everybody is put into the question and answer. So we will be able to capture those. Most of them made it on to the slides as people were commenting and we were pulling them through, but we'll go back and capture all of that. So I really appreciate all the community's input on that. There is confusion about kind of what the next step is beyond a flood board. So is there, I mean, beyond, you know, additional comments through the website, are there, you know, like, do you have a sense of what the key next step is, or do you want the staff to kind of regroup and then share that with the community through the website? it's just not quite clear for the members who are, the residents who are listening, what the next step is.
Respectfully, hey, RJ, I think though we have a good team, and so we should talk about that if we have to add others to the conversation, but I think we continue what we've been doing the last 18 months. Unfortunately, we're stuck with Zoom, and if we can have in person, we definitely want that, but to continue this discussion, because there's some education on both sides, for all of us, I think we should extend the process. I think the perception is that, hey, we have this deadline, and the deadline's now, or we lose the money, and yeah, there is a deadline and we're going to lose some money. That's okay. We should continue what we've been talking about because we believe in the process. We have the right team. We have new members of the community and it specifically impacts them the most, arguably, to the conversation. And I think we owe it to ourselves and the community to continue that for a period of months, should be the next step. To get feedback at the flood board is fine, but I think the follow-up is to our community that's on the call now. We want to continue this process, and however long that takes, we don't quite know, but we want to extend the contracts and we want to continue the workshops so everyone understands what we've done to date and then what else is available to us in opportunity. And if we have to bring other experts to the conversation, our team absolutely is important to be part of it, but if we have to bring someone else into it, we'll bring it to council and we'll bring them into the workshops as we go. And so I think that's the next step.
And the other thing that's come up in the conversation in the comments was, the potential formation of kind of a residents advisory group or community group to help, be further involved in this process beyond the kind of resilience advisory committee that has already been involved to date. So that should be something that maybe we talk about as a community or the town council thinks about.
So Sasha, so everyone can hear that point. I think it's a very valid one. And where the rubber meets the road is that how many residents live in Mariner Cove, and to really engage them. And so in our communications plan, I know Mike Moriarty, our communications manager, is on the call. We need to go door to door, and we need to let everyone know what that next step is with council approval as we engage. And when we move forward, it may come down to, honestly, everybody, on next steps, a vote, and to give us some feedback on moving forward with whatever they believe in. And we'll follow what the neighborhood wants us to do. But we need to engage everybody. And so that is definitely going to happen in the next 2 weeks. And I think we've done that, but again, we can always do better, but everyone on this call needs to take ownership of our community. And so please go to our website, please sign up for the newsletter and all of the contacts so we can keep you updated as we go. And I do think a core group is important, but honestly, it's the whole Mariner Cove neighborhood of what we're talking about.
Do we still have the email sign up link on the webpage, Corte Madera adapts.org? If people want to receive email updates or be on our
we can definitely, I'm not sure if it's there currently, so I'll go double check and we can definitely add it back in if it's not. But the town also has the listserv, and a lot of these like news flashes, opportunities, go out through that too.
Okay, well, yeah, thank you everyone for the great feedback. Again, we're gonna download the comments on the side. We've taken some diligent notes. We take everything to heart. We're gonna review all your comments, and we'll establish some next steps, and we will reach out to the public and make sure everyone's aware of them, and look forward to further participation.
Hey, RJ, I'm sorry, just one other thing before everyone gets off this call. I think is staff positioned to at least, like we talked about, because I really want to narrow this conversation down and at least get this conversation where it needs to be in the coming days, weeks, and months. That staff, again, on this document to consider the disclosures and those types of things, because I think those are very valid as a resident, as an owner. Even though it's not a legal document, it's a living document, but words matter, and those are scary. And I think we can certainly evaluate taking and making some changes there. And I want the community to know that, so they're still going to have concerns. We still need to engage, but they can focus the conversation on where it needs to be and where it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. No, all the, any of the disclaimer stuff, all those we can, I see a lot of reasons to pull that out. And we can even strip things down to keep them more broad strokes. And we'll come back to the public and see if that's enough to finalize this initial CAP document. Again, it's not, there's so much more work that's going to be through an alternatives analysis process, but can we get this document to a place where we're all comfortable with it, knowing that we're going to have much more effort, much more dialogue, many more conversations as part of the next chapter.
And maybe just add in, to Todd's point, that it really is the community and the town leadership working together to, figure out creative, innovative, realistic solutions to deal with the climate challenges now and into the future. And it takes all of us working together to build resilience to those challenges. So thank you for being here this evening and for adding your comments and thoughts into that mix. And we appreciate the opportunity to work together to find those solutions.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.